if you have to live in a way that is out of alignment with your values, it will inevitably show up in your physical and mental health. And whilst there might still be some resistance to this from different quarters, there is growing evidence around how not being able to live authentically has significant ramifications for your physical and mental health. Um, Most recently and specifically, Dr. Gabor Mate has done a lot of work looking at the connection between recovery from trauma and our ability to live authentically. And there's a lot around how, if we are prevented from living authentically, being aligned with our values, we are more likely to get ill. And that's a growing body of evidence that we can see. Then we just have to look at the stats around how many women are being diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Women are much more likely to experience burnout and much more likely to experience autoimmune disease. And this is all related to the expectations placed on women, which are just completely unrealistic. And it relates to the way in which, if anybody for a period of time isn't able to show up in a way that's authentic to their own values, you can see how that plays out in terms of anxiety and depression. You just need to look to the LGBTQ plus community as an example of that. And so if you understand that being blocked or restricted from showing up and living life true to your own values, if you look at that in context and you understand that, and you can see what that means for women and how that will manifest in terms of things like autoimmune disease, you really have to think about where you spend your time. Because if you are working in an environment where you are unable to be yourself, in simple terms, if you're unable to be yourself and you're working with people who are unaligned with any sort of set of values, it creates quite often what is called a toxic working environment. And there are so many examples of this where companies, organizations, corporations are clearly always just their North Star is the profits and commercialization. But they try to project an image of perhaps of inclusion or equality and diversity. Now, this is relevant to the case that's come up recently involving Nadiya Hussain, where she has been dropped by the BBC after 10 years. And I want to emphasize this because Nadiya is someone who has talked very openly about her own challenges around managing anxiety. Last October, she was diagnosed with autoimmune disease. And she's also talked very openly about experiencing gaslighting, working in the industry as a Muslim woman. And I think also the fact that she is a Muslim woman who covers her head. And I think that is a really important point in all of this, because she is somebody who is clearly aligned with her values. She's very vocal about that. She wants to talk about the challenges that women face, particularly in the Bangladeshi community. I've heard her speak in all sorts of ways about this, which is really important because there aren't enough voices who are able to create a platform like this. So she's clearly aligned with her values, but she has been working in an environment where the systems, the way that that works, is not aligned with any sort of meaningful values. And we can see this played out in examples of how they protect high value commodities who are white men who will behave in ways which are unacceptable, which are completely contrary to any of the values that they will publicly project or talk about. So, for example, people like Hugh Edwards, who they continue to pay even though he's being investigated by the police, and also Jeremy Clarkson, who was making a whole array of racist, sexist, and homophobic comments before he was finally let go when he actually physically harmed somebody else. So It's really crucial to understand how we need to zoom out and look at this for what it is. This is a woman who is of Bangladeshi origin. She is second generation. She has become a success largely on her own terms, but with the partnership or collaboration of a corporation who outwardly are projecting an image of inclusion, but behind the scenes are protecting men who are at worst engaging in criminal activity, or at the other end of it, really kind of just overstepping boundaries or hurting people or using language which is harmful. This is not an isolated kind of situation. This is a situation which is everyday life for women up and down the UK. And I know this in terms of how much harder it is for Black and Asian women to actually get to a point where they are heard and they are seen. And I really feel kind of sickened by how it really feels like the BBC have, to a degree, exploited Nadiya as a personality, as a woman of colour who has talent and has worked hard to get where she is. It feels like they were more than happy to really explore that, look at how they could capitalise on it, how they could create more TV shows and ways to kind of really develop her image. But the thing is, when it comes down to it, they're not in. They're not invested. They're not on board with the idea that a second generation South Asian woman who is fiercely talented and successful should be supported and protected in the way that an older white male who has been involved in criminal activity should be protected. It's a total imbalance. And it's more than an imbalance. It is collusion with criminal behaviour, but also it's collusion with just the basics of misogyny and racism, which are institutionalised. And if you want to see an example of that, just look at the news, see what's going on, refer to what's happened to Nadiya, because she is someone who has experienced anxiety and autoimmune disease, and suddenly they don't want to know anymore. For me, Nadiya is a story about resilience and power, and somebody who shows up and is aligned with their values. And no matter what happens next, no matter what the BBC do or whatever she decides to do next, she is in a far better place now that she has autonomy over her own life and her own decisions, because I can see that now she will be able to get to a much higher level, and the BBC will just move on to the next typical stereotype person that they want to pay lots of money to. Anyway, those are my thoughts on it. If you agree, hit like, share, and follow for more content.